Welcome to Engineered for Impact, a podcast helping engineers learn and think more about how they can have a positive social impact with their careers. In this episode, I talk to Sarah Qian, an entrepreneur who started an oat-based cream cheese company. We discuss the journey that Sarah took to start the company and what it looks like to work on a physical-based startup. We cover the challenges that she has faced in scaling up her operations, the ways that physical-based startups differ from software-based startups, Sarah's advice for other engineers who are interested in beginning their own startup, and finally, how engineers can contribute to alternate proteins and solving problems in food systems change. You'll find show notes with resources related to this episode at engineeredforimpact.show/Sarah. That's SARAH. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or colleague. And without further ado, here's Sarah.
My name is Sarah. I'm the founder of Compassion Creamery, where we craft oat-based cream cheese. So it's a product that is vegan, but also free from nuts, soy, coconut, a lot of the allergens, common allergens. And basically what we do is we combine traditional dairy cheese making techniques with a base that is crafted from 100% Australian grown oats. So it's something that no one has really done before. And the reason that it all started was actually 3 years ago during the thick of COVID lockdown. I was one of those people that went on the sourdough craze and started making a lot of sourdough, but then had this brilliant idea of wanting to put something on that sourdough. And so then I started thinking, what about vegan cheese? And so that led to a whole rabbit hole of like trying to find good vegan cheese recipes and trying to find that like one thing that would debunk this whole idea that vegan cheese is crap, which is, I guess, the common perception of what vegan cheese is. And so, it's sort of went on for 1.5 years, actually. That was how long the R&D took. And eventually got to a point where I started using oats instead of like the conventional vegan cheese ingredients such as cashews or nuts or coconut oil, starches. And I just went completely the opposite direction and started using oats, which is a very, strange ingredient to use in the land of vegan cheese. It's very common in milk nowadays, of course, but within cheese, it is still quite unique.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I will admit that I also fell into the sourdough hole throughout COVID for a little bit. So it seems like you've really found a way to harness your chemical and biomolecular engineering degrees in what you're doing now. So I'm curious if you could take me sort of through your journey from studying chemical and biomolecular engineering to starting Compassion Creamery and sort of getting to where you are today.
Yeah. Oh God, that story is a roller coaster. I applied to chemical engineering having absolutely zero idea what it was. I don't think anyone else in my cohort, aside from one or two who had like direct family members who'd also done the same degree, I don't think anyone else in my cohort really knew. We were all like, we love chemistry and we're good at maths. And so we were like, let's do chemical engineering. And it wasn't until I feel like the second semester of third year or maybe fourth year in a 4-year degree where we're like, I think I kind of get it now, which is like very late, right? Like if you're kind of like locked into a degree where you have absolutely no idea. But thankfully, my brother, who is also an engineer, but he does more like biomedical engineering, he gave me the advice of like chemical engineering is quite a broad degree and you can kind of like go into many different industries with it. And so I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. As you can tell, not much thought went into my selection process. And now that I'm on the flip side of that, I can definitely see how true that is, because literally any, like if you want to work in chemical engineering directly, anything that requires a manufacturing process needs a chemical engineer to be like, okay, so these are the steps that we need to make. This is how big the tank will be. This is how, what temperature we need to get to. All of these things. And then you work with other engineers to finesse that further. But overall, it's like really the proper name should be process engineer. I think that is a much more fitting name, because people are like, oh, you must be so good at chemistry. And I'm like, no, I'm really not. I'm really not. Yeah, there's like a whole nother department called the Department of Chemistry that are really good at chemistry. Like, that's not what we do. And yeah, so by the time fourth year rolled around, it just so happened that our design project was designing this wine manufacturing plant. So we were told to create basically a process that would process the other process that would process 5,000 tons of grapes a year. And so that was sort of like the first step into the food industry, I guess you could say, which was super coincidental, because every other year within at least chemical engineering in Sydney Uni was like oil distillation or catalytic converters, or like all of these different things, but very not food related. And I don't know why, but somehow they were like, yes, today, like this year, we're going to make wine. And we were all like, okay, sounds great. And in conjunction with that, my honours thesis for that year was also within food, but more in the medical space, I guess you could say. I was looking at the effects of mushroom proteins on prostate cancer. Turns out that they're great for us. Like, eat your mushrooms. And it was also during that time that I was doing a lot of research into just cancer and health in general, and noticed that dairy was actually very, almost like you could say, causally linked to promotion of a lot of like hormone related cancers, like breast cancer, prostate cancer, all of those things. And so that sort of, I guess, subliminally emphasized in the back of my head, like, oh, this is something that, needs attention. It's probably something that is quite neglected. It needs more help. I don't know if that's the right word. Needs more attention. Yeah. And so that was basically my university degree. And in my final year, I was applying to jobs. I'm actually from New Zealand. I applied to jobs in New Zealand. Like, no one wanted me. I was like, fine, okay, no one wants me there. I still have the passport. It's like, what's wrong? Applied to jobs in Sydney, Australia, and honestly, like, all the jobs in chemical engineering, at least in Sydney, are like paper mills or BOC gas or Sydney Water, and they weren't like, wow, I really want to work for that. They weren't very inspiring, but like that's not to like dampen anyone's enthusiasm for any of those. It just wasn't my thing. And so then I did what a really desperate university student would do, and that is sell my soul to the corporate world. And so then I ended up working as a management consultant, one of those really I don't know how else to put it, but one of those jobs where you like pretend to know a lot of stuff where you don't know anything. And they put you in a room to talk to people who like really know their stuff, and you're like, why am I here? Anyways, that was, it's again not to completely not to negate the job of a management consultant. Like, I have no regrets in spending a few years there, because it really helped me learn to talk to basically anyone and communicate effectively, which is, I think, something that within science and within STEM is something that we need to get a lot better at. Like, effective scientific communication is like, oh, it's so underrated. And yeah, something that I really want to eventually get into one day, but that's another story. Long story short, by COVID lockdown, my company had put me on the ATO, the Australian Taxation Office, as a client. And that project was as exciting as that sounds. Okay, not very at all. I was like, I started really questioning myself. I was like, really? Am I just gonna like do taxes for the rest of my life? And again, like, I love my accountant. She's like the best thing ever. And I'm sure she really enjoys doing it, but it's just really not my thing. And just by the end, I was like, look, there's this. I feel like there is no better time than now to really give this a proper go, and I will really hate myself for not trying. And so that's sort of how I ended up taking the leap and starting Compassion Creamery. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I faced a similar sort of challenge getting to the end of university and sort of looking at all the graduate level roles and kind of just not finding them particularly inspiring.
Yeah.
And yeah, instead of going to a management consultant, I went and did a PhD, which
so many of my friends did as well.
It's a different type of selling your soul.
Yeah.
For sure.
My brother did a PhD, and after, I didn't even witness that firsthand because his was in the UK. But even like a however many hour time difference, like 13-hour time difference, scarred me enough to never set foot in further academia. I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm so done.
Yeah, it's definitely an intense process, but I'm sure being a management consulting as well is also very intense in its own way.
Yeah. I feel like the bureaucracy is definitely something that is present in both, though. I say that, but I actually, I don't know if I should say this. Like, I almost miss that in a sense because I've been working by myself for 3 years. And like, yeah, it's just one of those things about working in a startup. Like, especially when you're a solo founder, like, it gets lonely. Like, you have no one else to bounce ideas off. And it's almost like, well, I could be stuck here, or I could be in a setting where, there's 10 layers of politics around you. And it's like, but at least you could talk to someone. It's like, yeah, it's such a strange contrast to grapple with.
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed that as well working with high impact engineers over the past year. Like, thankfully, I've had Jess to be able to work alongside as a co-founder and like bounce ideas off. But we're also on opposite sides of the globe. She's based in the UK and I'm here in Australia, so we talk like a few hours a week. But otherwise, yeah, I can definitely empathize with the loneliness feeling. And there's definitely one of the trade-offs that you make going into something that is a bit more autonomous and solo in its pursuit.
Definitely. Yeah.
So what stage is Compassion Creamery kind of at in terms of like production, factory? What is it sort of, can you sort of paint a picture of what the organization looks like at the moment?
Yeah, so over the past 1.5 years, I have been building out a factory, a pilot plant facility in Sydney. It is tiny if you are comparing it to Nestle standards or Philadelphia cream cheese factories, but a very crucial and important step in figuring out what is the sort of industrial standardized version of each step of what I did on the small sort of like lab kitchen scale. Yeah.
Awesome. So you've kind of got a bit of a space now and you're just figuring out how to scale up from, playing with different sort of recipes and things like that on your stovetop to being able to do it at a scalable or in a scalable way, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. It's and the issue with this product is that it's sort of never been done before, which then leads to the issue. Like, it's great from an IP perspective, not so great from a can anyone help me perspective, because pretty much everyone's going to be like, what the heck are you doing? Like, why? How? And I'm like, I came to you to understand how. And they're like, well, we don't really know. And I'm like, well, if you don't know, then who knows? And they're like, well, we don't know. So it's, yeah. It's been a lot of that over the past few months, which has been challenging to say the least, but also thankfully we're nearing the end of that. So that's, yeah, thank God.
Yeah, it seems like a challenge that is maybe more common in people who are doing like physical based startups, whereas I feel like in the software space, by comparison, it's probably a little bit easier to sort of map out how to sort of solve those types of problems because there's maybe just a bigger industry for it or something like that. So I'm curious how in sort of this process of figuring out how to industrialize, how do you go about solving these problems where people don't have there's not someone just to tap on the shoulder and ask, hey, how do you go about doing this?
Um, I honestly don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question. Because I spent probably the better part of like 9 months trying to figure out at least like one step that was a massive pain in the butt. Um, and it was to like on a very high level, what it was a blending step. And when I was doing it on the benchtop scale, it was so quick, so easy. I was like, woo, this is a breeze. Took it to the engineers who were manufacturing the equipment. I was like, yeah, so blah, 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 blah. Then you blend it, then blah, blah, blah. And they're like, cool, okay. So they gave me an impeller. And I was like, oh my God, why does this not work at all? And I was like, okay, maybe it's like this thing downstream. Like maybe it's the final product that's the issue. No, 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 it's not that. It's the step before. And I was like, oh my God, it's not that. And then I went to, like backwards and backwards and backwards. And I was like, oh my God, it is this blending step. Like it's this thing that should be so theoretically easy. Because I suppose in uni, like we didn't really talk too in depth about, I guess, fluid mechanics, like not the impeller kind of fluid mechanics. And so I then I then had this almost like existential crisis moment, which sounds a bit dramatic, where I went to probably close to 10 to 12 different manufacturers, just like knocking on their doors and being like, hey, I have this really big issue. And they're like, I don't care, or that's great. Here's like some generic impeller. If it works, then great. If not, then sorry, I can't help you. Um, and it happened again and again and again. And there was one time where it worked at the trial in their facility, brought it home, didn't work. And I was like, what is happening? I was like, this is insanity. Like, this is just so unfair. Like, why is physics betraying me? um, and then I think at the very end, which was towards the middle of this year, I was like, all right, this is it. I have talked to so many manufacturers, so many consultants, so many people. There was specifically one person who had worked for Philadelphia, specifically within the cream cheese department, and then left to work at an oat milk facility. And I was like, you are the perfect person for me. Like, I will need to prick your brain. I don't care how much you cost me per hour, but it will be worth it. And then on the phone call, he was like, wait, hold on. Before you do anything, I don't think I can actually help you. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, I really, like, you've tried everything that I was going to suggest. And I was like, oh my God. how do you not know? I was like, it was almost like in disbelief. I was like, if you don't know, then who am I going to talk to? And so I remember actually going back to uni and approaching one of the lecturers that used to teach me, and we're still on good terms. And he's just like an awesome dude, super willing to help out. He's one of those like just genius brains and just loves thinking about like insane problems. And I was like, look, this is like a super wild card, but hey, can I just like pick your brain for 15 minutes? He was like, yeah, sure, come on in. Talk to him. And he was like, well, I mean, we've got some stuff in the lab if you want to just like try it. Like you'll need to sign a waiver form saying that if anything happens, it's not on me. And I'm like, yeah, sure, that's fine. That's standard. I don't know how many waiver forms I've signed now. But yeah, he basically got me into his lab. We did a bunch of trials. It was a total disaster. But through that disaster, he had the ability to actually point out the things that I wanted and did not want. And that was so helpful because I think through all of those trials that I had done, I could point out that it was not right, but I couldn't actually verbalize why it was not right or what I was actually looking for and what the factors were that I was trying to select for. And so this guy just like told me in coherent engineering words what I actually needed. I was like, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. And that was brilliant because then I could actually go to an engineer and be like, this is what I'm looking for. I do not know what this impeller needs to look like. I have no clue like what diameter to vessel ratio I need. I don't know what RPM I need. I just know that this is the final result that I need. And it just so happened that the engineer that I was talking to actually sort of had dabbled in some kind of semi-related work to what I was doing. Very like on the surface you wouldn't think so, but actually the sort of phenomena that I was searching for was kind of similar. And he was like, I kind of don't understand, but I think I might be able to help you. And so the first few iterations of the stuff, like the impellers that he gave me, total disaster again. But thankfully, he was also a really intelligent engineer who could come in and be like, okay, this didn't work because of blah, blah, blah. If you're looking for that, then what we actually need is blah. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you. Like, this is great. And yeah, like, I guess long story short, it's just being able to actually coherently put into words what the ask actually is, and translate that into standard engineering lingo instead of being like me trying to describe this, like drawing it out in terrible diagrams and be like, do you see that thing? Like, that's what I want. And they're like, what thing? um, yeah. So that's,
It also sounds like there's like a big element of just persistence and knowing that,
yes.
or perhaps trusting that it can be done. It's just a matter of like finding the right combination of factors that allow it to be done.
Yeah.
And
No, 100%. Yeah. I have been sort of like, I have an advisor down in Melbourne who runs an engineering consultancy, and every time I feel stuck, I just call them up and I was like, oh, that's easy, Sarah. Yeah, we can totally do that. Yeah, no, it's all good. And I'm like, do you actually know if there could be a solution? I'm like, well, not at this moment, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. Like, this is the positivity that I need in my life. Like this is what I need. And yeah, honestly, I completely echo that. I genuinely think like some blind optimism and like a stroke of luck is like it's just what you need. Yeah, a lot of those times it's like when you feel so despondent, it's like, you know what, I could just be one trial away from getting it. Yeah.
Yeah, it also sounds like fluid mechanics and thermodynamics being like
Mhm.
the annoying thing of scaling up seems to be a
Oh,
recurring thing
oh my God.
in
Yeah.
the alternate protein industry as well.
Yes.
Like one of our other guests was saying that that is the biggest bottleneck
Mm,
in her perspective,
100%.
and that was even from an academic perspective of the research that she was doing, just like scaling up from benchtop to even just like mixing things and then trying to go bigger. And as soon as you get different volumes and thermodynamic properties involved, it's
That
a
makes
bit
me
of a mess.
feel so much better. Like, thank you for telling me.
Yeah, because my PhD was in fluid mechanics,
Oh,
and
right.
I
Yeah,
can,
yeah,
yeah, I'm obviously only equipped to comment on a narrow aspect of fluid
yeah.
mechanics, but definitely as like a field, it's tricky. There is not a lot that scales nicely
Yeah.
once you get down to like complex interactions.
I remember, I don't know if this was just like our lecturers withholding information, but as soon as Reynolds number went into turbulent flow, they were like, we don't really know what happens here.
That's pretty much
But
the takeaway. Yeah,
yeah, we're like, okay, great. They're just like, assume laminar in this case. And we're like, okay, great. And so all of our exams, um, Reynolds number was always tiny. And we're like, great, thank God. Because we have no idea what to do if it's big.
yeah. As soon as it gets big, you basically need to just start taking a bunch of experimental data or doing simulations to be able to like collect statistics. Because my experiments were on turbulent flow, and so it was like a lot of just millions of data points and then doing statistical analysis to be able to say something about the sort of average um, behavior of the flow
Yeah, right.
there. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Wow.
It's
That's
it's tricky.
yeah, yeah. Talk about tenacity. I can't even imagine how much you would have needed.
What does the day to day look like for you as a startup founder who's doing a physical based startup?
Um, you know what? Another meme just flashed into my head, and it's that dog in the burning house that says everything's fine. Yeah, no, it's a lot of firefighting. I would say, like, I think I've become comfortable with the fact that my day to day is having a macroscopic view of the general direction that I want to head, uh, but just basically doing the minimum that I can get away with in that point in time. I think that's the best way I can describe it. Because there's like literally just way too much. Like I could spend 10 weeks on perfecting one thing, where it's probably just better to get something super scrappy out, see if it works. If it doesn't work, it's like, great, okay, well, at least I know it doesn't work. It's very similar to, I guess, how software engineers work on, like doing sprints and having MVPs and that kind of mentality. But applying that to, I guess, this sort of physical product based thing. Yeah, I guess one of the trickiest parts about product based businesses is that you actually have a physical supply chain that you need to deal with. Like you have physical inventory that is coming in, you have an actual manufacturing process where stuff needs to be moved or pumped or put down the drain or whatever it is. And then at the end of the day, you have a product that needs to go on a refrigerated truck to a distribution center before being sent out to different places. Like it's a when you have something concrete in your hands, and especially if it has a short shelf life and it is a perishable product, it's like almost hot potatoes. Like it's got to go, send it somewhere, to put it somewhere. Yeah, yeah, I'd say that's probably the main difference, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And where are you currently distributing the product?
Mostly food service, so that's more B2B, so cafes, restaurants, catering companies. Some of the people that we're talking to right now are frightfully large. I'm just again taking it one step at a time. What is the minimum that I can get away with right now? That's sort of the food service. We are doing direct to consumer online. So basically, people. I don't know why I'm trying to explain what online shopping is. Everyone knows what online shopping is. There's nothing I need to explain about that. We ship online. It's connected to a consumer facing Instagram, so we share recipe videos and behind the scenes and like other compassion creamery related stuff, which then usually is like the main funnel to go into the website. And on top of that, the last sort of main avenue that people usually consider is retail. Retail at the moment, we do have interest, even internationally actually, but the biggest technical hurdle that we need to get past is shelf life. So that's another thing that I am doing and trying to get right, because if you don't have enough shelf life, then the retail buyer won't necessarily, or they probably won't want you from the get-go, but if they do give you a chance and it does go off, then there is a high likelihood that they'll discontinue you. And it's also not good for the consumer as well to bring back a product, not finish it in time, and to go off already. So yeah, it's just stuff that I'm working on sort of behind the scenes as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a tricky problem to try and solve. But also, yeah, very important if you want to reach or tap into that market. Yeah.
Yeah. Shelf life is so annoying. It's like you're trying to like kill invisible things. Like, just die already. Why are you still here?
Has sort of the last 3 years given you a bit of an insight into what the alternate protein landscape is like in Australia?
Yeah. Um I I mean I've definitely kept up with the alternative protein space since, probably like 2015 or something, very, very long ago. Um, sorry, I make that sound like I'm an expert. No, not really not. 2015 is like a decent time period. There are people who have been vegan for much longer, who've been following the space for like much, much longer. But it's given me enough time to sort of watch the growth in the space, which has been super exciting. Like, it's gone from walking into a coffee shop and being like, do you serve milk that is not cow milk? And they're like, maybe. And they come back from the back, like the back of the cafe, with this like super dusty box of UHT soy milk that's probably expired. They're like, yeah, we can make you some soy. You're like, that's great. And now you walk into a coffee shop and they have like soy and oat and almond and macadamia and like 10 billion other plant milks that you're like, wow, you can turn pistachios into a milk now. Like, I didn't even think about that. That's awesome though. So I guess in terms of the popularity, it's definitely blown up. And I I guess the tendency with startups, especially tech-based startups, is to I remember one of my mentors being like, well, you basically just get VC investment, chuck a bunch of rocket fuel onto it and see where it goes, and hopefully it lands. And it's like, well, that's a bit terrifying, isn't it? Like, so we don't really, like, no one really knows. And we just kind of see how it goes, and hope for the best, and we, do as much prep as we can, but it ultimately is, a rocket. And the like I think naturally as a person and definitely as a founder, I am quite cautious about things. So adding rocket fuel to anything like freaks me the heck out. So I've personally been very cautious about taking any sort of like VC or private equity or whatever it is investment. But the companies that have they've been interesting to watch, especially the ones that have gone public. So, like the two biggest ones I can think of are Oatly and Beyond Meat. And I think there is it's an interesting space because you've got they have distribution, they have the ability to manufacture, but the price point is not at a point where consumers are like, hey, this is something that is equally as affordable. This is equally as tasty and nutritious. I'm going to go with the kinder option or the more environmental option or whatever it is. We're still not quite there yet. And so as a result, then your consumer pool shrinks as well. And that's, I think, just, at the moment we're not quite at the stage yet because we aren't I guess we aren't decimating the Amazon rainforest and putting in like however many cattle herds that they do. That is a much more efficient form of, I guess, growing protein en masse in this at this very point in time. Yeah, but in saying that, that doesn't dull my hope necessarily at all because like change doesn't come in an instant. It's not going to, you know, suddenly become Rome in one day. There are definitely transitionary periods, and the fact that these products are even in supermarkets, that they're so readily available, that the plant-based category is growing, that buyers are so ready to take on new products, just speaks volumes about the direction that we're heading. Like I saw a lady in the supermarket yesterday, and she had like animal products in her shopping basket, but she had picked up a vegan mince, and she was looking at it like half curious, half like, what the heck is this? But she eventually, like, I was just very creepily stalking her from a distance. But she eventually like decided to put it in her basket. I was like, yes, like that's great. Like that's, like it's change. And yes, it's not going to come overnight, and it never has and it never will. But each step that we make towards a kinder, healthier, more sustainable future is a step in the right direction. And so yeah, there's so much news coming out about how, how terrible Beyond Meat is doing and how unprofitable they are and all of these things. And it's like, yeah, but like talking shit about them is probably not going to help the fact that we actually need to change our food systems. We actually need to figure out how to make it better, or what are things that we can do to make it more fruitful instead of just like chucking rotten tomatoes and then be like, boo, that sucks. Like it's great. What can we do to do it better then? Like it's just you have a lot of haters out there at the moment, I think, which is something that that's also something we need to work on.
Now that you've kind of been, I guess, in the thick of it a little bit, do you have any intuition, or have you noticed anything around like where you feel like engineers can really contribute to the space?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean the reason why I sort of started what I am doing now is because there aren't many people who are concerned about the way that our food is currently grown and manufactured and harvested and brought onto our plate, who are also technically sound and brilliant at doing the things that engineers are brilliant at doing. Like by nature, people almost like the word engineer is almost synonymous with the word problem solver. And so the fact that like working in this space is like every day it's just solving like a bucket ton of problems. It's almost like we need so many more engineers in this space. It's like it's dying for more people to really get stuck in. And the majority of the founders that I know, who some of them who are, close friends to me, they often will have to like sit down with me and like just like I don't necessarily know how to solve their problems, nor do I know their process, at least before we start talking. But um, having having gone through 4 years of engineering hell, it's somehow like just really, really fruitful for someone who has never really thought in that way before. Someone who, for example, is super creative or super good at creating flavor combinations, they may not necessarily know at all how processes work or how to efficiently, streamline a supply chain or a process or, yeah, like it's it's I can see so much potential of marrying up people with technical backgrounds with people who want to scale products or like have a product ready, but they have no idea how to actually take it into commercialization. And until it does, the impact that we have is minimal, right? Because the accessibility is not there. The distribution is not there. And unfortunately, unlike a software where you can just like deploy and suddenly someone in the Netherlands can have that software, we can't really do that. And yeah, so as a result, we just kind of need the people who know how to do it. And even me, even though I have a piece of paper saying that I am a chemical engineer, it would be so much better to have like a whole team around me, because maybe that 9-month odyssey of me smacking my head against the metaphorical brick wall could have only been like 8 weeks and we could have figured it out. Like, it's stuff that, yeah, like it quickens everything. And as a result, like you just have a better product, a faster go to market strategy. Everything just is better. So yeah, definitely, I think we need more engineers. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that think is striking from your 9-month odyssey is that you were kind of the engineer with the vision and this impact oriented sort of goal and trajectory, and you were bringing other engineers on board with that. So even though they themselves may not be super focused on reducing animal suffering or on having a positive social impact, by virtue of you having that interest and you bringing them in on the journey that you're on, you're kind of aligning them to that cause, so to speak. And so there is kind of leverage that you can have there, being a technically minded person who can sort of dictate what the direction is technically. And then you can kind of go and find the people who are technically most capable to help you solve those problems along the way, and kind of use their efforts for good.
Definitely, yeah. No, that's so well put. I, I think for me it was like part of the battle was like trying to convince them that this is actually a really severe problem that I'm struggling with. But once they got it, they were like, I think she's being serious. Like she really needs help with this. Like, I was like, you have no idea how many people I've talked to. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for other engineers who are interested in starting their own physical product-based startup?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think the first bits of advice would probably be more generic in terms of like just wanting to start a startup, wanting to start a business or a startup in general. But like one of the most important things is figuring out if the thing that you're trying to make is actually a solution to a problem that is actually a problem. Because if it's not actually a problem, then you don't really have anything. I remember one of my mentors that I met during an accelerator that I did, he was saying, don't create vitamins, create painkillers. Because if you create something that is a vitamin, it's kind of like, oh, that's nice. but that's nice will never actually result in people being motivated or inspired enough to actually, want to purchase your product or follow your journey or whatever it is. Whereas if it's a painkiller, it's like, oh my God, where have you been all my life? Like, I need you now. I needed you yesterday. I need you. Like, when is this coming out? Like, when can I access it? And so that's when like, okay, I've actually struck something that people are so concerned about, that the moment that it hits, and is available, people will be there. And unless, I guess, with any sort of startup that is a for profit, for purpose startup, I guess, or not even for purpose, just anyone who is for profit, you kind of need a stable revenue stream to actually grow the business. And so unless you actually figure that part out, you're kind of just running like a failing charity, I guess you could say. Like, it's not even a charity then. So that's one of the most important things to figure out. The second thing I would actually say that has been one of my greatest assets, maybe, is the the ability to craft a story. And I think the reason why is because until you've convinced, for example, if you're pitching to a room full of people, until you actually get them to care and truly like really really stand behind your product, you're basically pitching to an empty room. And if they don't care, then you're basically, everyone's wasting everyone's time. And so to actually do that super effectively, the way that I found works best for me is actually to describe my entire story, basically from the beginning, and then also how that has led to why I am doing what I am doing and why it is so important that you actually care as well, you as the audience cares. And yeah, like that is to be able to communicate your why is one of the it's honestly like probably one of the most effective things that you can spend time doing, because you can't do this alone. A startup will never work with just one person. Even though I'm a solo founder, I have so many people that I have to give credit to in helping me grow to even this stage. And the way that you convince them to help you is by effectively convincing them that this is something that they need to care about. And so until you can do that, honestly, it's just really really difficult to do it without it. So I'd say those two things are kind of like very just generic startup, but also very important startup things to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think also for engineers as well, because I think there's
Yes. Well, I didn't
for
want to
both
say
of
it,
the.
but you said it, so that's okay.
But I think there's like a tendency to sort of come from a really technical point of view and be like, this, I have figured out how to do something that is interesting or a better way of doing it, or, technically is impressive. It's like, I've got a technically interesting thing that I think you should care about. But that, like, just because that's technically interesting doesn't mean people will actually care about it. And as, like, to your first point, maybe people don't even have a problem with the current thing that they're using, or whatever, like, unless it actually like solves a pain point for that person. They don't care if it's the most effective way of doing X or Y, or if it's the, some novel method for, producing something. Like, it's irrelevant to them unless they actually have a problem that needs to be solved. And then, yeah, if you're trying to convince people to come on your journey, just knowing that it's like, or trying to explain to them how it's technically a really good idea is not necessarily the best way to actually
No, that's
get
hard.
buy-in.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you can sometimes see like people's eyes just glass over and you're like, all right, I lost you. Okay, no worries. That's fine. That's fine. That actually reminds me. I remember someone once telling me, and I don't know who to give credit this like of this to, nor do I nor am I sure that I'm not butchering this, but it was something along the lines of like, um, especially as engineers, because we're such problem solvers, if you want to actually be a founder, become a problem seeker rather than a problem solver. And it's almost like, oh yeah, well, it's like we innately see something that's wrong. And they're like, let's fix this. And it's like, no, hold on, before you actually start, like you can almost hear like the engines in your brain like start worrying. It's like, oh, problem that needs to be solved. All right, let's go. And it's like, hold on, is this actually the right problem that we need to be solved, or is the problem like over there? That's yeah, it's so important. It really, really is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good framework. Yeah, being a problem seeker, not a problem. Well, combining problem seeking with problem solving, and not just doing problem solving for the sake.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. It reminds me of like people who have accidentally built apps that no one actually need. It's like, oh, this is so cool. Like the UX is beautiful and like all the designs and the graphics, it's like wow. And it's like great, but no one's actually using it. It's like, yeah, because it wasn't actually a problem.
How have you gone about improving, I guess, that communication aspect and being able to sell the story? Like, have there been specific things that you've done to sort of hone that ability, or did you kind of come in with that to this journey?
um, I think a mixture of both. So, one thing that I always credit was my parents' decision to listen to my year 4 teacher to put me into speech and drama classes in year 4. And honestly, I still to this day, I was like, I think that was one of the best investments that you ever made. The reason why my teacher did that was because I was a painfully shy child. I would never speak up in class, even if the teacher called me out, like called my name to say something. I'd be like, the answer is 10. And they'd be like, what? um, and yeah, like through speech and drama, I think one of the things that as adults, I think we forget is that our voice is an instrument that should be used and exercised. And we often forget that we have pitch, we have tempo, we have so many things that we can almost exploit to really communicate well and communicate so like your words are actually heard and not just sort of pass through someone's ears. So that is definitely one thing. That's sort of, I guess, more on the technical side of how to communicate and use your voice, almost like you're playing an instrument. The other side of like the actual content, though, I have found that honestly, speaking to people and just pitching your idea to people, to random strangers who don't know what the heck oat cream cheese is, and there are plenty of them out there. I think in the world it's probably like 0.0001% of people who actually know what oat cream cheese is now. There's a lot of people I can still practice on, and that's super cool. Like that's super important for me to like continuously just get better at it. But the people who have listened to it a few times, they're also really important because at least if you find people within, for example, the investor network or within the startup community, people whose bread and butter is to weed out bad pitches, they will tell you very honestly when they zone out, or that is so irrelevant. Why are you putting that in there? Or why have you not put this in there? Like this is crucial information. Where is it? Um, and a culmination of all of that means that you get to get to pitch with extremely effective content that captures your audience, that is tailored to that specific audience, as well as communicating it in a way where people are like, enamored by what you're saying. They're like, oh my God, yeah, like, how do I get involved in this? Like, what's the best way to like support you on your journey? And some people, may not actually uh, have the ability to directly get involved with what you're doing, but inadvertently can still support you or can refer you on to so many other people. Yeah, sorry. I feel like all of this sounds like I do this extremely well, and I don't want to put it across that way. But it's just stuff that I've learned, I guess, which is yeah. Feel free to cut that out as well.
Yeah. No, I think it's definitely valuable because I think it is something that, I mean, I don't recall getting too many opportunities in my undergraduate degree to really get up and present that much. There are a handful that I can recall, but there was certainly wasn't like a focus of like my education. It was really around the more technical skills. So I think, yeah, figuring out ways that you can practice and develop that communication side of things, especially if it's important for getting you where you need to go with your career journey. Yeah, it's certainly valuable advice.
Yeah, I mean, it's stuff that you can practice every day, right? Like, especially with the like training your voice. Sometimes I play a game of like, if someone is very disinterested in a conversation, I'm like, okay, how long will it take for me to re-engage them so they really care? And it's like you can just have fun with it, right? Like, nobody's stopping you from doing that. If anything, it's going to make the conversation more fun and everyone has a good time. So it's like, yeah.
That's fantastic. I guess we've touched on a couple of things that like skills that you don't necessarily get from engineering that are useful to develop in a startup context. I'm curious if there are any skills that you've found have carried over from the engineering that have been particularly
Oh my
useful
gosh,
in the startup context.
so many, like so many. I think one of the biggest ones is knowing how to talk, at least on a high level, to an engineer in a way that they understand. And I know I mentioned before in my 9-month odyssey, which is now we're going to refer it to now, that I spent a lot of time actually figuring out how to verbalize what I needed. But that was a very specific niche example that I just didn't know how to, like, I just didn't have the words to actually verbalize it. But on a general scope, like even being able to draw out a process flow diagram, being able to do mass balance, like super simple stuff from a chemical engineering lens, just makes everything so much easier. And when the engineer comes back to you and they're like, hey, so these are like the PNIDs that we've drawn up. If you've never seen a PNID before and you see it for the first time, it's probably going to be like, holy heck, what the hell are all of these circles and lines and things that are coming out of this like square that says tank on it? Like, it's a little bit overwhelming. But if you have a background of being very familiar with these things, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I mean, that's the blah blah, and that's the yada yada, and then also you're also able to spot out mistakes potentially, because even though the communication will be much more streamlined, the actual feedback may not be completely correct, or it may not have been captured completely. And so if you're able to troubleshoot mistakes on, say, for example, that PNID, that is much better than correcting it after the machine has been made and you're like, shit, crap, how do I actually tell the manufacturer that this was not what I wanted? Especially because there are some machines that are manufactured only overseas as well. So like, what are you going to do? Like, then call them up, ship them back, then have it re-imported. Like, it's not a fun time. Yeah. I'd say that that's probably like one of the biggest things, being able to talk technically with other people, and like it makes their job a lot easier as well. Because if you're like, yeah, I need like blah blah the temperature increase is this, and you can like tell them what you're kind of thinking. Like my hypothesis is that we will need XYZ, um, you know, uh, tanks or impellers or pumps or whatever it is. And they're like, yeah, no, actually, that's probably like viable, but we have another alternative that could also work. Would you consider this? And like, if you have that background and you kind of have seen it before or are sort of familiar, then you're like, oh, yeah, okay, maybe that could work or whatever it is. Like, it just makes, just communicating much simpler. It's like, for example, the other way of putting it is if you suddenly put me in a law firm, I'd be like, what the heck is going on? And half the time would just the lawyer, like half the time would just be the lawyer figuring out what the heck I'm actually trying to tell them. It's probably not going to be a very fruitful conversation, but that's probably like the biggest thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Before we sort of start closing out, is there anything you want to mention or return to?
Maybe just the point on like, should I start a startup? Because I get asked that quite a lot. And I'm like, am I really the right person to ask? I think there's a lot of things that people will say, including like, you really got to make sure that this is a product, like that this is a problem that you're so passionate about solving, and like that to me was always like that box was always ticked, because this is something that is so aligned to like my values and what I actually care about so deeply. So that definitely is true, but I think that the one thing that almost was the catalyst for taking that risk, and I mentioned it very briefly before, but it was the question that kept on popping up in my head, and it said, will I hate myself for not trying? And it wouldn't even need, like, I wouldn't even need a year or 3 months for me to like for that niggling thought in the back of my brain to start like rearing its head and be like, yeah, but what if you never try it? Like, what if, and that what if question, if it is loud enough and you cannot ignore it, I will say that it is probably worth giving it a go. And of course, there are other factors as well, like financial means, and if you have dependents in your family, like all of those things suddenly create a lot more complexity around the situation, which is also why I remember hearing someone saying that the best time to start a startup, if you can, is earlier in life before you have dependents, because once you have them, then the responsibility of you to actually like take care and look after them becomes much greater. But yeah, that was sort of what the pushing point for me was, the tipping point. That's the right word. What the tipping point was.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think it's something that, I don't know. I think engineers, I think we're like relatively employable, and there's a chance that if we do go out on a limb and do something that's a bit more unconventional, like trying to start up something that we've come across, or an idea that we have that we want to sort of get going, there is a bit of a safety net career-wise, and like obviously, yeah, financial situation and security is going to be very different for different people depending on their stage of life and background, and it's not going to necessarily be the case for everybody that they can just instantly go and quit their job to try something. But for those that do have that ability to do that, there is a good amount of security in having an engineering background, I think, because there's always going to be a need for engineers in some way or another. There are ways to sort of do it more safely, like if you can take a secondment or sort of a leave of absence or something like that, or extended unpaid leave, where you do still have the security of, well, if this doesn't work out in 3 months, then I can always go back to my job. And I don't, like, at worst, I lose out on 3 months' salary or something like that. Like, you can kind of heavily limit your downside that way as well, depending on, obviously, the flexibility of your employer. But yeah, there might be scope for doing that and taking actually a period of leave to test something out. And yeah, it also gives you the pressure to try to fail as quickly as possible, which is also good.
Yes, no, that's exactly what I did. So I took a 1 year leave of absence, which was available for me at my employee after 2 years of full time, which I had fulfilled, and I was like, well, cool. And I remember, I remember towards the end of the 1 year, the HR manager like emailing me like, it's almost time to welcome you back, and I was like, ah. Oh, that was yeah, like if you do follow through with that, there will also come a stage where you're like, okay, so now I've used up my safety blanket. What am I gonna do now? That almost, but at that stage, I feel like that was less scary than actually taking the first leave of absence. Like at that point, I was pretty convinced that I was like I had already gone too far to now call it quits, basically. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's definitely like a good spot to be in.
Yeah.
Do you have like a top resource for people who are interested in learning more about alternate proteins and the industry?
Yeah, I guess, and it's probably similar to the answer that the other guest had, but Good Food Institute is probably the go-to for most people on this stuff. I think there are certain researchers within each university, at least in Sydney, that I know of, like UNSW, USyd, all have a specific research group that is quite geared towards, like for example, in Sydney University, there's a research group that is looking at pulse proteins and how to turn that into alternative proteins. There's one in UNSW that's specifically looking at like lab grown meat and lab grown stuff in general. So if you find like pockets of research groups within unis and even internationally as well, there's so many overseas. That's often like a really good gauge as to where the most recent research is up to. But also companies that have their in-house R&D obviously aren't going to publicly release that information either at all or at least until they get a patent. But once they get a patent, then it's free for all. Like anyone can read that stuff. So that's probably, yeah. But more like general industry knowledge, I think, yeah, GFI has it pretty well covered. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What do you wish you had invented and why?
Oh God, I didn't know that was a question. I actually have not.
I guess you've kind of invented oat-based cream
Yeah,
cheese,
yeah.
so I guess you kind of
Like
got that one under your belt at least.
God, there are just so many problems in this one. I'm like, which one do I want to solve? I guess the biggest thing that I personally would like the biggest problem that I personally would love to see solved is alleviating just mass suffering, specifically of animals, because that's the one that I think that I can have the greatest impact in. And we're still at a stage where it's kind of like it's still quite nascent. It's not gotten to a stage of maturity yet, and there's so much that is coming from a consumer lens, like the behavioral side, that is so tricky. So if there was like a machine where you could go in, or like walk past it and maybe not even know that you've walked past it, and then walk out the other side being like fully educated and like understand why this is something that needs attention, that would be great. Like, wow, that would do so much of the work for us. Yeah. That's probably not a very conventional answer.
No, but also not a bad answer either. It
I
definitely does seem like one of the harder points
definitely,
of the space,
yeah,
because it is, if everyone were to feel the level of suffering at the sort of I guess intensity, or to the degree to which you do, then it would be a very different landscape.
yeah. I remember seeing this Instagram video this morning about how there's this fake business in America called Elwood's Dog Meat, and they basically pretend that they sell dog meat, um, to the hilarious outrage of so many people, and it's like complete satire, right? It's brilliant. The founder is this lady called Molly Elwood, and she is the most brilliant copywriter I've ever seen in my life. But she basically takes all of the excuses that or like all of the reasons that people who are not vegan come up with, and basically put them in all of her content, and it's brilliant to watch. And there's this guy who was walking through a university, and they had set up an Elwood's dog meat stall, and they were handing out samples of Labradoodle sausage, and this dude was like literally flipping tables. He's like, how dare you, like, this is absolutely fucking atrocious, like, blah, blah, blah. And then these guys are like, this is perfect. This is actually perfect. Like, you are literally feeding us the reason why we are this is gold. Yeah, like there's a lot of like really clever people out there who are doing like quite avant-garde styles of like consumer behavior change. But I just genuinely think we need to get there faster, and we're just, yeah, it's still not at a pace where we're going to be able to actually I don't know, some days I wake up and I'm like, woo, it's a good day to be in the alt protein space, and then other days I'm like, why am I even doing this? Like, this is absolutely, there's no hope. Like, why what are we trying to say? What are we trying to do? Like this yeah, it's a bit up and down, but
Yeah, it's tough.
like it's yeah.
Yeah.
I think with most impact stuff though, you sort of have those moments of like pure inspiration, like pure hopelessness. Yeah.
Yeah, it's being able to kind of remember the inspiration and not let the hopelessness get you down, or sort of like hold that at arm's reach and kind of use it to fuel the fire as much as it can without putting it out.
Exactly. I remember someone telling to me, and it's like been my motto ever since. It's like, never be the first person in line to bring yourself down. I'm like, I mean, that's true. There's a whole world out there who can do that for me.
Yeah, that's a good motto.
Yeah.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a really fun conversation.
Oh, I hope it has been. Sorry, I feel like it's been a lot of me ranting for some parts of it.
That's been great.
I hope it's mildly entertaining and hopefully somewhat informative.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Sarah. For detailed show notes, head to engineeredforimpact.show/Sarah. That's SARAH. You can support the podcast by leaving us feedback on our website or sharing this episode with a friend or colleague. Thanks for listening, and happy problem solving.